What's up, guys? Four-wheeler doctor back again. Got a little 350 Rancher we're working on today. Hey, also I want to start this segment off with the funny t-shirt of the day. I got a truckload of these in the other day, various ones, but thought that might make you laugh. Alright, so we got a 350 Rancher here today, electric shift, having some issues as a lot of people do. This one's actually a little bit weird. It will shift up and down and says it's in gear, but it will not actually go into gear. You can't even get it to go in gear with the emergency shifter. It moves back and forth, but just won't go into gear. I took it apart before, and the little arm that goes on the shift rod was kicked over, and didn't look like it was applying the clutch to let it go in gear. Don't really understand why it wouldn't go into gear when you have it not running, but I don't know, it won't. So anyway, owner has pretty much got tired of it and had mentioned this before, but now he wants to go through with it. We're gonna make this thing a foot shift. A lot of people, I've done this to a number of them, and we're gonna do it to this one. It's a little bit of work, and I may end up replacing that shift shaft on this one that you normally wouldn't have to do on yours if you have an electrical problem with the shift motor or the angle sensor or whatever. But I'm probably gonna have to fix that shaft because I'm thinking it's got a strip splines on it. But I'm gonna show what you do to pull this out, and I'm actually gonna fix it the right way and replace this hex-headed shaft with a spline shaft and put a shifter on it so it looks just factory. And I've read various things on these about people talking about it's not good to do like that, that it makes them, the transmission won't last and all this. But honestly, the inside of this motor is identical to the manual shift, aside from that shift lever, and there's really no difference. So it doesn't make any difference if you shift it manually or make this a manual shift. It'll work. I've done this on 350s, 500s. I think I did it on a 450 one time. A lot of people have problems with electric shifts and not want to even go through repairing them, and I have had some that just repaired everything on it and it's still not worked right. Got some other issue that they can't find, and end up just putting a shifter on it and go. So that's what we're going to do. Alright, start off with, I'm going to pull these floorboards off to get us a little better access to this front end, so we can get in there and see what's going on with that shift shaft. And we also need to pull the rear end off of this thing too. Is about the easiest way to get this shaft out of here. So I'll go through all that, and we'll start off by pulling the floorboards off and draining the oil out. Alright, cut the camera back on when I get all that started. Alright guys, I got the floorboards out of the way. Kind of got ahead of myself, started taking stuff off, forgot I hadn't videoed it. So next thing you need to take off is this little electric shift guard, 2 bolts in it, 10 millimeters. Then the shift motor, it's got 2 bolts in it. I've actually already removed it. 1 bolt here, 1 bolt here. I kept it hooked up and just slid it up there to the front, as well as unhooked the angle sensor. And alright guys, I got everything, or at least all the bolts out of it now. First thing we need to take off after the bolts is this front cover for the electric shift. There's a little pry point right here at the top of it. You just stick a screwdriver in there. Dang, knock the camera out of whack. But stick a screwdriver in there and then wiggle that thing off. Got some pretty fresh RTV, because like I said, I just took this apart not too long ago. The inside here, you've got a gear here. Got some small teeth on it. It's on the top. The next one is a funny looking arm here, and then the third one is actually in the middle. So those are all your electric shift stuff. I'm gonna put all that back in there. Well, I might put it in there, I might not. I might just leave that out and let it free spool. But anyway, got that alright guys, got the front cover off this thing. I didn't really find anything wrong with that shift shaft on it. I'm not real sure what it was doing. But anyway, you really don't have to do any of that stuff on the front end. What you're really dealing with on the back end here is changing out the shaft. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. First thing we're going to do is pull the swing arm out. I guess that's the only way to do this, because you have to get the output shaft off here. So to get the swing arm out, you pop these two covers off. You got one on this side, one on the other. These are pretty nasty in there, as this one is. And there's an Allen head, I guess a little nipple-like thing in there. It's a 17 millimeter. You just want to get a, I use a Allen head with a 1/2-inch drive to get that out. I'm hoping these are going to come out because they're rusted real bad. So let me go ahead and loosen both of these up. The other one's got a lock collar on it. You really don't even have to mess with that right now. When you're taking it apart, the lock collar is really just for when you put it back together. So I'm going to see if I can get these things to come out, and just I'm going to hope for the best. I'll cut the camera on when I get them loosened up. Alright guys, I got these the two pivot bolts up there loosened up. Finally broke them loose. Cheater pipe and 3/4 inch drive, ratchet, and all kind of stuff. So now all we got to do is pull these vent lines off. The one here for the brake, as you can see, it ain't even hooked up. And then the one here for the diff, slide it off. Remove these wing nuts off the brake lever, and take this 14 millimeter bolt out of the shock. And you'll want to put a jack under here to hold this up a little bit, because once you loosen this thing up, the swing arm will just fall down all the way to the ground actually. And it's easier if you leave the tires on this thing when you're doing this. Just makes it easier once you slide it out to handle it, roll it around. So let me get all this loosened up, and I'll cut the camera back on in just a second.
There.
Yeah. Alright guys, I got all the pivot bolts out of here, the shock bolt out, the brake lines loose, and the vent lines. All you have to do is also remove this boot over here, this output shaft. Just take a screwdriver and pry that joint off of the output shaft, and as you can see, it just falls off. And then I got my jack stuck up under there, kind of close to the bike. You can just ease that back, and it'll come off the whole thing at one time. And we'll wheel it out of there, just like that. And that's how you pull the rear end out. And now the next thing to do is get in here and start taking some of this stuff off the back side. You're going to have to work with me on the camera angle there. But I'm going to probably pull this air box out just to get it out of the way so I can get to it. Take the pull start off and the starter off. And then I'll start taking these bolts off of this back cover. I'll cut the camera back on and get the air box out and start taking some bolts out. Alright guys, got the air box out of the way. Went ahead and took the power wire here off the top of the starter wire. Got the two bolts loose on the starter here. There's 3 8 millimeter bolts on this pull start. Go ahead and take those out. Got those all out. Then you got a little clip here on the bottom of the pull start that holds these wires in, and that'll get your pull start out of the way. You can take a screwdriver and stick up in the very end up here to pry this starter back. It's got an O-ring on it, so it takes a little bit to pop it off. So I'm going to go ahead and slide that back, get the pull start off, and then we'll be ready to take the center crankshaft bolt out, and may end up unhooking some of this wiring down here just to make it a little easier to get the whole cover off. So I'll cut the camera back on when I get all that stuff out of the way. Alright guys, I got all the bolts out of here off the recoil. Now you just got to take this center bolt out of the crankshaft here and slide that off. There it is. Alright, and then take these about 6 10 millimeter bolts off for the stator, and I'll cut the camera back on right before I pull that off, just to show you what it looks like on the inside. Alright guys, I got the stator cover off. I think I said that a while ago. I've already loosened these bolts up on this thing, or most of them. You have to take this ground wire off here. It's a 10 millimeter bolt. All the bolts around that outside edge. There's 2 bolts here on this bracket. I couldn't get those from the bottom side. The wires you need to remove. The one is this gray one here. The trick with this thing is you need to unclip it from the frame, because if you don't clip it from the frame, it will not unplug. It's got some kind of little safety or some kind of little clasp in there that won't let it unplug. So you also need to take this the clear one off here, and then there's a single wire here that you have to remove. That's for the fan sensor. and then this other prong here, and that gets all your wires loose that go on your stator cover there. And just pretty much the only thing else left to do is remove this arm and this 10mm nut here that's on the reverse cable. I'll pull that off and pull this lever off, get all those bolts out, and then I'll cut the camera back on right before I pry all this off. So let me get to that. Alright guys, got all the bolts out of this thing now. Just to pry it back, there's a little pry point right here by the brake lever. Kind of stick a screwdriver in there and pry back on the brake lever a little bit. There's also one over here on the left side by the head. It's still a little bit stuck on there. I think I'm gonna have to can't get it to slide out. No, I think it's hung a little bit on the other side. I'll get over here and try it. Not much to grab on over here. Looks like this wire is pulling it tight here, so we'll unplug it. It's a little barrel connector. Wiggle it around, it pulls off. Still not wanting to come off there real easy. May end up having to pry it back, and I don't know what's holding it. Get up under there and see if I can tell a little bit more. Alright guys, I got it. I can pry on it a little bit over here. You can take on this little bolt of this speed sensor here and pry out on it a little, and that's enough. It was stuck on there just a little bit for some reason. I'll wiggle that thing around until it comes off. Let me jump over on the other side and get it real quick. Yeah, we almost got it off there. A couple little dowels on this thing that hold it. Kind of try to keep it from coming off there. There we go. Kind of get it halfway squared up and it'll come off. So wiggle this thing off of here. I believe some parts of the transmission or the rear drive trying to come off too. I can hear the gears shaking around in there. There went the hose off of the carburetor. I don't really know what this thing's doing now. There we go. Lay it back some. Get it to slide on out of there. Shoot, I'm going to have to get under there. I can't get it right into position from laying on that side. All right. There we go. Yeah, I need to. Hung right here on the bottom. It's like the motor needs to pick up a little bit. There it is. I believe this thing's only got one way that it'll come out of here. Just barely catching. There's a little tab that sticks off the bottom of the cover there. Darn thing's catching on it. It needs to slide on out. I don't really know of an easy way to make that happen. Aside from unbolting the motor mount until picking up on the engine, because it's not far from going. Let me see. Pry up on the engine just a hair with a crowbar. God, it's so close. So close. Just like that. I don't know if you can kind of see how I got that thing pretty much just picked up on the top of it, and this little tab came out, which is down here at the bottom. See that little tab there? That's what was catching. So it's out of there now. Get all the wires out. Alright. And that leads us to the little part we've been chasing after. This little shaft right here is what we're going to change out. So to do that, all you have to do is remove that bolt there. You actually can stick your hand in here and hold this one piece, slide your new shaft in there, stick the bolt back in. That's all there is to it. So let me cut the camera back on. I'll get that thing loosened up and I'll let y'all see me as I swap it out. Alright guys, I'm gonna see if I can get this thing out of here and not drop something in the process. I've got this the 10mm bolt here loosened up. So you just slide that thing out. It's got a little nipple on the end of it, and that's actually what catches on the end of the shaft. And here's the new shaft. Need the part number for it. Hope you can read that. There are some of these used ones that are available online. It's just somebody had one of these, so I bought it off of them. So what I like to do is kind of halfway hold that that little arm with a pair of pliers, just so it doesn't fall down in there. And I may actually pull this thing out just to see what it looks like. Make sure that's not some of the problem as to why this thing's doing crazy stuff. But you just slide this shaft out. Slide it out over here with my left hand. And this is the arm that it slides up on. The nipple looks good on that. Everything looks good on it. So I don't really see anything that's wrong in here. Alright, so the next thing to do is to slide this shaft on out. And I tell you what, I've got another seal for this shifter. That thing looks horrible. So I'm gonna stick that seal in there, just so I can keep that thing from leaking anymore. I don't know how bad it's leaking now, but it's got oil caked up around it pretty good there, so more than likely it's leaking. So just pop that thing out with a screwdriver. Little seal there. And then I got a new one of those to put back in. Grab it. Alright. Actually, let me grab some RTV. I'm going to put some RTV around this seal. There's your part number on your seal, just to make sure it seals up in there good. Let me grab that. I'll cut the camera right back on. Alright guys, I've got a little bit of RTV on this seal. Go smear it around there a little. Just push it into the hole here. And usually you can just push these in with your fingers. Yeah. Slide that in till it's about flush with the edge of the case. Drop a screwdriver, and that's how you replace the seal. I don't know what I do with my lid from RTV now. But anyway, alright, now we need to put the new shaft in, and also put this arm back in here. The key with the arm here, you really don't have to take this out. I just pulled it out to make sure everything was good with it. But you got to make sure this nipple goes into that that hole in the end of that shift shaft that's in there. So I'm gonna make sure I get that lined up first before I even stick the shaft in there. Just like that. and slide this shaft in. Kind of twist it a little bit as it goes in. Helps it get in that seal. Just like that. It seats all the way up. You can see the end of it there. There's it starts to taper down right there at the end. That shaft may come out just a little bit when I stick that bolt back in. And speaking of the bolt, I done knocked it off. So, well, there. I got to find the bolt now. Let me cut the camera back on in a sec because I don't know where it went. Found it. So just thread that bolt back in there. Hit it with the impact. And then I like to rotate this thing and make sure it works like it should. And it does. So there you go. Now, just a matter of putting the thing back together. So I'm gonna go ahead. It appears it's in neutral. Yep. So it's in neutral. So that's the one thing you want to check and make sure that shift drum is lined up with that little tick mark. So your shift sensor goes back in there correctly. I'm gonna clean the that outer case up, which is up here. Hit this right here with the Scotch-Brite and get that old silicone or RTV off of there, and then we'll put a new layer on there and get ready to stick it back together. Let me get all this cleaned up and I'll cut the camera back on in a second. Alright guys, I got a thin layer of RTV smeared around this cover here. There are two dowels that go in there. They're both still in the case here. One right there and one over here. Okay, so the other thing you want to make sure before you stick this thing in there is this. This is what tells you which gear it's in. And it needs to be, you can barely tell, but there's a long side to this pin and a short side. The long side points to that end right there, and that's neutral. And that makes sure that when you put the thing back together, for one thing, the motor's in neutral, which we checked out a while ago. So make sure that that thing's lined up right so that it'll show neutral on the dash. Some people beat those things back together and push this shaft through, and it makes a mess. So just make sure you get that lined up right so that it doesn't break that sensor. One other thing that you need to make sure of is that the camera set up in here is that the washer, there's a thin washer on this one gear here. Make sure it's in there, and that's pretty much it. The gear up here for the starter, it's in. Everything else I believe's in there like it should be. So let me get the see if I can get the camera to so you can see the whole thing. There we go. Considering how tough this thing was to get out of here, I'm thinking it's going to be equally as fun to get back in. So I'll give it a shot and knock the camera over in the meantime. Let's see how that line back up. Alright, so I got a crowbar stuck under the engine here to kind of help ease it up a little bit, so that maybe makes it a little easier to get in there. I'm also kind of taking it easy here so I don't knock the camera off the stand. Got a lot of things working against me on this little job. Alright, so if I remember correctly, we kind of had this thing standing straight up like this when we took it off. So I'm going to try to replicate that and see if it might do the same thing again when we go put it back on. Alright, so get the output shaft there into the seal over here. Got it started in there. Shoot this thing. other thing we got to line up is the shaft that goes through here, which is the reverse shaft. This is where he had the issue. This little nipple on the bottom of that cover hit the frame, and I pried up on it just a hair with the screwdriver. I mean, with the crowbar. I think that might have halfway fixed our problem. Let me see here. We're not quite lined up with that reverse. The reverse shaft. I believe it dropped down too far. Yes, it did. There we go. Now it's lined up on the reverse shaft there. This thing should slide right together. Just like that. Didn't even have to tap it with a hammer. The key here is this little crowbar stuck under the engine here. There's a brace that runs across, and I think that really helps to get all this in there. Tell you, a lesser man probably would have just cut that little nipple off, because it honestly doesn't look like it does anything, and that would have made it easier as well. So let me get all these bolts stuck in here. You do want to make sure you plug this wire back in around the side here, that little barrel connector, and it's got that little kind of protector brace type thing that goes on there. Make sure you put that on too. That's some kind of sensor. So let me get all these bolts back in here, and I'll cut the camera back on right before I stick this stator on. Guys, I got most of the bolts back in there. Just don't forget to put this bracket back on this bolt here for the reverse cable, and then that's how the reverse arm goes in there. It's got a washer and a nut that goes on it. Make sure you put that on and tighten it up. It's got a little cog, a little notch in there that it fits on. So make sure you get it lined up on that notch, or your reverse won't work. So, all right, I'm get that tightened up, and also got to put the bracket. Bracket goes over here on this side for that little side engine cover. Let me get that put on there too, and then we will. I'll cut the camera back on right before I get the stator. All right, guys, I got the stator, a little light layer of RTV around it. You really don't have to put RTV on this because it does have a gasket, but it does recommend that you put it over these little rubber grommets that hold the wires in, because that's, if it's going to leak, it's going to leak right there. Just slide this thing on. It's magnetized, so make sure you hang on to it good. And it does have, I didn't mention that, it does have two dowels. Both of these stayed in here, so make sure both your dowels are in there. So you just slide this thing in here. So you gotta kind of hold on to it a little bit, because it'll about snatch it out of your hand. Just like that. I've actually seat it all the way up in there, and then stick the bolts in it. So all right, let me get these bolts in here, and probably next thing I'll do is just go ahead and stick this the pull start gear, or whatever you want to call this thing. I don't think this is one that has a notch in it. I believe it'll go on there anyway. So just slide it in there, make sure your splines are lined up, and it should slide right in. Actually, it's not right there. And make sure it ain't got a cog spot. Some of these have a messed up tooth on them, so they'll only go on one way for some reason. And yes, this one does. It does have a messed up spot. So, well, sometimes if you hold your mouth right, it'll line right up when you stick it on there. So if it doesn't line up when you stick it down, just rotate it around. You may have to go all the way around. That's usually the way my luck runs. But this time, the stars were all aligned, and I was holding my mouth right, and it lined right up. So, all right, let me get all these bolts in the stator. I'll tighten that crankcase or crank shaft bolt up, and then we will probably stick the starter on. Cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, next thing to stick on is this starter. Starter has a little bit of oil on it. I'm going to smear it around on that O-ring, make it slide in there a little easier, and just stick it in the hole. If you've got, just drop the nut. If you've got the starter gear lined up in there right, it'll slide right on, just like that. And then there is a nut that goes on it to attach the starter power wire to. So go ahead and tighten that up. And then this starter has a little funny bracket here on the bottom of it. Goes on like that. Two 10mm bolts, and then this other nut that's still stuck on here, that's what the air box bolts to. So make sure you stick that back on there. You probably shouldn't use a wrench to do this power wire up here, because you don't want to torque down on it too hard. It can spin around and tear up stuff inside the starter, so I don't want to do that. Alright, and the last thing back here, aside from the rear end, is the pull start. Fits in there just like that. For some reason they decided to use 8mm bolts on this one instead of 10mm. So you got to change your socket out. Actually, one other thing that I did not include on this last thing to put on the back is the ground wires. They are shoved up in the frame up here, so I didn't quite see them, but I do see the bolt in our piece of cardboard. Alright, let me see if I can get this thing to zoom out. Alright, so your ground wire has to go back in wherever it went. Goodness gracious, I got it all twisted up. Okay, ground wire goes back in right there, and there's a hole, if you can see it, right over top of all these wires. Hole right there that the ground wire bolts into. So just put that 10mm bolt back in there, and that'll be it with the back. Aside from hooking up all these wires, you can kind of halfway see how the wires go. These run on the bottom here, and then run up the side. This one just goes up the side, and I'll probably cut the camera on back on the other side before I hook those wires up. And all right, let me get all that stuff tightened up, and we'll get ready to hook the wires up. Alright guys, and then here's all your cables you got to hook back up. There's round white ones from your stator, the big square one from your shift sensor. Make sure it gets back on that frame clip. Got a little round one here, that's from your temperature sensor. Just plugs into that barrel connector. And then this other one from your speed sensor plugs into this 3-prong plug over here. Shoot, that's it as far as electrical stuff goes. Alright, so now I think I'm going to let me see, I'll probably just go ahead and put the rear end back in it. I would say put the air box in, but I think if I leave the air box out, it might give me a little bit more room and light down here to make sure I get everything lined up. So let me get this camera set up over there, and I'll see if I can get the rear end slid under this thing. Alright guys, I'm going to try to roll this rear end up under here. Sometimes this goes pretty easy, sometimes it doesn't. So got it kind of rigged up on a jack over here. Still, tires are still on it. Makes it a little easier to roll around. Halfway get lined up. So, lower the jack down here a little bit to get it over the shop. Alright. I've run into this problem before too. The jack runs into your jack stand, so you can't use it so far up under here. Alright, the key thing here is just to get it close as far as in between the frame and all here. What you're going to end up having to do is back this jack up so that you can pick the whole rear end up. But before you do that, you're going to have to line. Alright, we're recording again. Alright, so what you got to do here, you got it slid up in there. Got to get this output shaft lined up here. And this is not too terribly bad. Wiggle it around some. Get your splines in there, and then there again, that time there, it was just about lined up perfect. So it slipped right on there. So I didn't even have to rotate the rear end or anything, or rotate the axle any on it. So it slid right in. So now, as you can see, see if I can zoom in. See if you can tell. There you go. The what we're looking like as far as our alignment goes, that side of it is way off. This one's about half the hole off. So you got to get the rear end pushed up in there far enough for one thing, and then lift it up with this jack. Zoom back out there. I got the jack down here under the rear end, so lift it up with the jack to kind of halfway get it lined up, and the whole time you want to push in on it, push forward on it, so that your points where you're going to bolt it in, the pivot bolts, so that they line up. There we go. That's pretty close there. I had to rotate the rear end around just a little bit so that output shaft wasn't quite on there. See, I need the jack moved forward just a hair, but I'm gonna see if I can get these pivot pins started on there. The one on this left side is the pivot pin that doesn't have that locking collar on it. I kind of like to just halfway get it started in there by hand. You can mess these bearings up on these things if you don't get it quite right. Guys, I'm sorry, I'm trying to use this new stand here, and it's not working too good. Doing some crazy stuff on me, so not sure how much of that you heard, but anyway, I'm gonna reposition the jack so that it'll lift right there about the center of the swing arm, because the front end of the swing arm needs to come up. But it also helps if you jack the rear end of the swing arm up as well. And like I said, this whole time that output shaft's slid on the output shaft, so it's kind of pivoting on the output shaft. It's still not forward far enough. Just push it forward. That's pretty dang close as far as the pin goes. Get it slipped off the jack. So let me see if I can slide it forward a little more. There it is. Kind of halfway feel when it feels like it halfway slides together. I think I got a little bit too much pressure on it now. Yeah, it's still about a half a bolt hole off. See what I think I'm gonna do. I think I'm gonna jack it up, put a block of wood under both these tires to at least get the back end of the swing arm up. That'll make it a little easier to get the front end lined up. So slide a block of wood under here. So I'm going to shock. Block of wood on the other side. And what you're trying to do here is just get the rear end to sit up a little higher. The back side of the rear end. The front got a lot of control over it with this jack stuck under it, but it's still not quite lined up in there. Bear with me, guys. I'm getting this thing slowly but surely. Alright, so this side over here is almost lined up. I usually take my impact and don't just ram it in there because I don't want to mess that bearing up. Like I said, it's just got a tapered bearing on it. Looks like it's going in there real good. Let me see what the other side will do. I can get it started. What'll happen sometimes is they'll be cocked back a little bit, and that's what's happened here. This back side here is off just a little bit, so it doesn't let the pin on the other side line up quite like it should. Good, that one's in there. Let me check this other side. Sometimes it helps to back it back out, back the pivot. Actually, I don't have to back this one back out. It mashed all the way in there. All right, hopefully the camera's still on and y'all saw all that. So what we got here is we got just a little bit of gap here. Before it had a lot until I straightened that other side up. So now you tighten this one down. I think it's like, I don't know, I'll give you the torque specs on it when I get the torque wrench, but it's pretty hard. Tighten this one way down, tighten the other one down just a little bit. And you're supposed to lock that locking collar, but I think that locking collar didn't move because it's rusted. So hopefully I'm gonna be able to tighten this thing down just like it was, and it'll be fine. So let me grab a torque wrench, get the torque spec, and we'll get these things torqued down. Alright guys, got the torque specs for these things. This left side is supposed to be like 83 foot-pounds, which is pretty dang tight. And the other side is supposed to be like 4 Newton meters, which is very, very loose. Only like, I don't know, probably 6 foot-pounds or something like that. Alright, so that's 83 there. And what I like to do on these things is when I get them halfway tightened up, I don't have the shock bolted up in the back, is to lift the rear end up and down until you, just to make sure the bearings are seated in there right, or seated in there good. And this one looks pretty good. You usually get a little bit of gap in between your frame and your swing arm. You know, you don't want a half-inch gap in there or nothing, but this one, as you can see, has, I don't know, maybe an 1/8 of an inch. It might be less than that. So over here on this other side, see if I can get in here where you can see it. It's pretty dark in there, so I don't know if you'll be able to see it. But anyway, we'll see if we can torque this one down. So, it's saying it's torqued now, but I don't think it is. I don't believe it's all the way tight in there. Might just try to run it in there with the regular, like a 3/8" drive ratchet. But I don't think it's as tight as it needs to be. Let me grab my ratchet. Yeah, it went in there pretty easy, and then it got harder right there at the last little bit. So I'm thinking that thing didn't move any. The locking collar. So we're just going to tighten this thing down against that locking collar, and that should be it on it. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm going to work this rear end up and down a couple times. Just to, it's hitting the dang shock. Get blocks of wood out from under. Work it up and down a few times. Yeah, it seems to be working fine. You got about the same amount of gap on, you just got a hair bit more gap on that left side than you do on the right side, but they're not extended way out. Like I said, there might be 1/8 of an inch, maybe less, of gap in there. So I believe that's about where it needs to be. So now what I need to do is put the shock bolt on, the breather hoses on the brake and the rear end, and the brake cables back in, and that rear end will be done. I am going to check the oil in it because some of the oil leaked out when I had it tilted down earlier. And I still got to do the front end, put the front end of the motor back together. I'll probably go ahead and stick it in because you really didn't have to do that on this this little job. So I'll go ahead and stick it back in there, and I may cut the camera back on to show what I leave out of the electric shift motor and gears and up there, just to make it shift easier. So I'll probably cut the camera back on for that, and then I'll show you the final product. Alright guys, I'm about to get finished up on this foot shift, electric shift to foot shift conversion. Just putting the electric shift stuff back in here. You really don't have to. I'm going to stick both the gears in there, but I will leave this part out here just to cut down on the resistance you get when you have to push the pedal down. If you don't have it trying to turn all them gears and all that, it's not as hard to push down. So I'm going to leave this part out and bolt everything else back up like it's factory. Still got to put the fan on and the shifter on, and that'll be it. So I'll cut the camera back on in just a little bit and show you how it works. Alright guys, there's the finished product. Got the shifter on. I actually didn't even set any plastic. It's a little bit higher than you would normally see, but with the floorboard being like that, I raised it up some. But just to show you, first gear, and reverse. It's just a little bit harder than a normal foot shift. They say that these clutches have, the change clutches have different springs in them, but it's not nothing that'll be uncomfortable with using. So, all right, that's pretty much how you change electric shift to a foot shift, and this thing will work from now on. So, you guys check out my other videos and hit the like button, subscribe. Please subscribe, because I'm needing some subscribers here. My subscriber count is way down. So, I appreciate it. Check me out.